The walls of the Russian prison were thick, cold, and unforgiving, designed to break even the strongest spirits. But what the prison guards didn't realize was that sometimes, even in the darkest places, something unexpected can grow. Daisy Link, 29 years old, was serving time for a violent crime she never fully spoke about. In the cell block across from her, Joan DePaz, a man with a murder charge to his name, lived in complete isolation. They weren't allowed to see each other, touch each other, or even be in the same room. But the prison had a flaw. A tiny air vent, barely large enough to slip a rolled-up note through, connected their cells. And through that vent, a love story unlike any other began. At first, it was just whispers. The way the prison echoed at night made it feel like ghosts were speaking from the walls. "Who's there?" Daisy had once whispered, half believing she had finally lost her mind. A low chuckle came in response. "Name's Joan. Who are you?" The conversation started slow, cautious, each testing the other. The prison system had hardened them, but loneliness was crueler than any guard. In a world where trust was a weakness, they did the unthinkable. They let their walls down. Daisy told Joan about the outside world, about the sky he hadn't seen in years. He told her about the things he regretted, the nights he couldn't sleep. And somewhere between those whispered confessions, the connection deepened into something neither of them expected: love. But love inside a prison was useless unless they could find a way to make it last. A plan so insane, it might just work. One night, Daisy whispered something through the vent that made Joan's heart stop. "I want a baby." Joan laughed, thinking she was joking. "I hate to break it to you, but we're kinda missing a key step in that process." But Daisy was serious. She wanted something that was theirs, something the prison couldn't take away, something that proved their love was real. That's when Joan did the impossible. Over the next month, he smuggled, hid, and carefully stored his own DNA in a container made from whatever he could find. When the guards weren't watching, he slipped it through the air vent. Daisy, with no medical help, no tools, and nothing but pure desperation, attempted the unthinkable. Did it work? That part comes later. But before we continue, if you're as shocked as we are, make sure to subscribe for more insane real-life stories that will leave you speechless. And trust us, you're not ready for what happens next. Prisons are built to control everything: what you eat, when you sleep, who you speak to. But what they never planned for was an inmate defying the very laws of biology within their walls. Daisy Link sat in the dim light of her cell, staring at the tiny container Joan had risked everything to send through the air vent. It was absurd. It was insane. It was impossible. And yet, she had no intention of giving up. She had no doctor, no medical equipment, no way of knowing if this would even work. But she had hope. And in a place like this, hope was more powerful than any prison bar. A dangerous secret Daisy knew. She had to be careful. If the guards discovered what she was trying to do, the consequences would be brutal. She had seen what happened to inmates who broke the rules. They disappeared. So she worked in silence, keeping the secret between herself and Joan. Every night, they whispered through the vent, their voices their only form of touch. "Did it work?" Joan asked one evening, his voice low and anxious. Daisy bit her lip, pressing a hand against her stomach. "I don't know, not yet." Days passed. Then weeks. Daisy's body felt different. She had no test, no confirmation, but deep down she knew it had worked. She was pregnant. No one can ever know. Daisy wanted to celebrate, but fear held her back. A pregnancy in prison wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence. The guards would ask too many questions. They would separate her and Joan. If they found out how this had happened, it wouldn't just be her life at risk. Joan could be punished in ways she didn't even want to imagine. So she did what she had always done. She survived. She wore baggier clothes. She forced herself to eat despite the prison's horrific food. She hid her sickness, her exhaustion, her growing belly. And Joan? He could do nothing but listen. "Are you safe?" he asked every night. "As safe as I can be," she would whisper back. Months passed. Her stomach grew. The guards barely noticed. too distracted by riots, fights, and their own corruption. The inmates didn't care. Most were too focused on their own survival. But Daisy knew she was running out of time. A baby was coming, and there was nowhere to hide. The night everything changed. 7 months into her pregnancy, Daisy woke up to a sharp pain in her stomach. It was too soon, too fast. Panic set in as she realized what was happening. She was going into labor. She had no doctor, no medicine, no one to help her. She staggered to the air vent, pressing her lips against the cold metal. "Joan, it's happening." There was silence on the other end. Then, a shaky breath. "Hold on, Daisy, just hold on." But she couldn't. The gods wouldn't care. They wouldn't stop to help. If they found out she was pregnant, they would take the baby, and she would never see it again. Daisy gritted her teeth. She had survived this long. She wasn't going to lose now. The next few hours were the longest of her life. And as dawn broke over the prison walls, a single cry echoed through the cell. A baby's cry. Life born from love. Between two people who had never even seen each other's faces. But the nightmare wasn't over yet, because now, Daisy had to do the impossible. Protect her child from a system that was never meant to let them survive. And that's when things got even more dangerous. Before we move to the shocking final chapter, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the unbelievable twist that's coming next. Daisy lay on the cold concrete floor, her body trembling, her newborn son cradled against her chest. He was so small, so fragile, and yet, against all odds, he had survived. She pressed a shaking hand over his tiny back, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his breath. Relief and terror warred inside her. The hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. A baby wasn't meant to survive in a place like this. The prison was brutal, filthy, merciless. It crushed the weak. It destroyed those who didn't fight back. And now she had to keep him hidden. Somehow, a desperate plan Joan was waiting for her at the air vent. She could hear the strain in his breathing, the raw desperation in his voice. "Daisy, is he okay?" Daisy clutched the baby closer. "He's alive." Silence. Then, a shaky exhale. "What does he look like?" Daisy smiled through her exhaustion. "Like you." She couldn't see Joan, had never seen him, but she imagined him closing his eyes, picturing the child they had created through an impossible, forbidden act. Then, the weight of reality crashed over them both. "What do we do now?" Joan asked. Daisy swallowed. That was the question, wasn't it? The prison would notice. The guards weren't completely blind. If they found out she had a baby, they would take him from her. She would never see him again. They had to act fast. "We need help," she whispered. Joan hesitated. From who? There was only one answer. The inmates. Daisy wasn't naive. She had spent years locked away with murderers, thieves, and drug lords. Trust didn't exist in prison. Everyone had an angle. Everyone had a price. But there were still rules. Even in the darkest places, there was an unspoken code. And among women, especially imprisoned women, there was an understanding. If she could convince the right people, she might stand a chance. That night, she made her move. She clutched the baby close and shuffled toward the far side of the cell block where the most dangerous women in the prison gathered. Tatiana, the Russian crime boss, looked up as Daisy approached. Her cold blue eyes flickered with curiosity, then widened slightly as she noticed the bundle in Daisy's arms. "You've got to be joking," Tatiana muttered, standing up. Daisy forced herself to stay calm. "I need your help." Tatiana crossed her arms. "And why would I do that?" Daisy didn't beg. She didn't plead. She did the only thing that might work. She offered a deal. "Keep my baby safe," Daisy said, voice steady. "And I'll owe you. Anything. No limits." Tatiana smirked. "Anything." Daisy didn't hesitate. "Yes." Tatiana studied her for a long moment. Then, she leaned in, lowering her voice. "You're lucky, Daisy. Women like us, we don't get many things to believe in. But a baby is different." Then, she nodded. "Fine, I'll keep the guards off your back. But remember, you owe me." It wasn't a promise. It was a debt, one that Daisy would have to repay. The watchful eyes. For a while, the plan worked. Tatiana and her crew kept the guards distracted, planting fights and rumors in the opposite wing of the prison whenever suspicion rose. They whispered warnings to Daisy, gave her scraps of extra food, helped her smuggle clean water. But the problem with secrets? They never stay hidden for long. Daisy noticed it first in the way the guards started looking at her. Lingering glances, whispers between shifts. And then, one day, they stopped ignoring her completely. A guard named Petrov cornered her after roll call. He was big. His uniform stretched tight over his belly, his breath reeking of stale cigarettes. "We need to have a little chat," he said, grabbing her wrist. Daisy kept her face blank. "About what?" Petrov grinned. "I think you know. Bargaining with the devil." They took her to the warden's office, a small, dimly lit room that smelled like sweat and corruption. Warden Ivanov sat behind a metal desk, tapping his fingers against the surface. "I'll be direct," he said. "You've been hiding something." Daisy's pulse pounded. She forced herself to stay still. "I don't know what you're talking about." Ivanov smiled. "We both know that's a lie." Petrov leaned in, sneering. "Where's the baby, Daisy?" For one terrible second she thought it was over. But then Ivanov did something unexpected. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Look, I don't care about how you did it. I care about what happens next." Daisy frowned. "What do you mean?" Ivanov smiled. A slow, cruel smile. "You give me something, and maybe your baby stays safe." Petrov chuckled. "I hear you're close with Tatiana. Maybe you help us take care of her, and we help you." Daisy's stomach turned. She had two choices: betray the woman who had protected her, or risk everything to escape. The escape plan. Daisy had never considered escape before. It was impossible. The walls were too high, the guards too ruthless. No one got out. But now she had no choice. She whispered her plan to Joan through the air vent that night. "We need to get out of here." Joan was silent for a long moment. Then he said two words. "I'm ready." They didn't have time. The guards would come for her soon. She had one chance, and she was going to take it. The great escape. Tatiana agreed instantly. "I always knew you'd need an exit plan." She had connections, corrupt guards, a man on the outside who could provide transport, but the risk was immense. Joan was in a separate block. Getting to him would be nearly impossible. And then there was the baby. How do you smuggle a newborn out of a prison? Tatiana had the answer. "You're not the only one who's been planning," she said. "There's a supply truck leaving in 2 days. If you can get to it, you're free." Daisy's heart pounded. "And Joan?" Tatiana's expression darkened. "That's harder." There was no guarantee they could free Joan, no guarantee they could all make it out alive. But Daisy had made a promise. She wasn't leaving without him. The night of the escape was chaos. Tatiana started a riot in the West Block, drawing every guard to the fight. Daisy ran through the darkened corridors, the baby wrapped tightly against her chest. She reached the supply area just as the truck was starting to move. She jumped, barely making it onto the back of the truck, and then gunfire. Shouting, Joan was running toward the truck, guards chasing him. Daisy screamed his name, and then a gunshot. Joan collapsed. Daisy's world shattered. The truck sped away, her son crying in her arms, and behind her, the man she loved was left in the darkness of the prison. Freedom at a cost. Daisy never saw Joan again. She escaped. She made it out. She raised their son. But every night, she remembered the voice in the air vent. The impossible love, the miracle they created, and the price they paid. The end. If this story left you speechless, hit that subscribe button for more shocking true stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat.